Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. I got very behind on my wrap-ups over the past couple of months. I just had very good reading months and it just meant that these became daunting to film. So today I'm going through my November wrap-up, starting from the books I like the least through to the books I like the most. And this month I only had 2 DNFs, which is pretty good. First up, we have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. So this very much appealed to me because it was advertised as for fans of the Night Circus. I started this and I found that it lent more into angsty YA than it did sort of whimsical magic. And I knew that continuing in it, if I was just going to be comparing it to the Night Circus, then I probably wasn't going to end up having a very good time. I also found that, so I then looked into some reviews to see if it was worth continuing, and I ended up getting spoiled for the ending anyway. I didn't really like the main character. I thought that she was a bit of a boring. She didn't have much of a personality. She felt very much like a stand-in for the reader, really. And then their father in it, so this follows 2 sisters who want to go to the Caraval circus, and they run away in order to do so, but when they get her there, her sister gets kidnapped by the leader of the circus. And I just thought her sister was far more of an interesting character. I didn't really like, I can't even remember the main character's name. Anyway, I can't even find the name of the main character. I just thought she was a bit of a brick, and their father, who is a very imposing character in these girls' lives, I just felt like he was portrayed as this like bad guy McBad sort of thing, just an abusive asshole for the sake of needing a one-dimensional villain. I know that there are people like that in the world. I just thought this could have been done with more nuance, although I can see it working for its target age demographic. It just wasn't for me. I need to talk less about the books that I only got like 20 pages into or something. So the next one I don't have, and that is An Unexpected Kind of Love. Now, I've been getting a little bit more into trying out romance this year, especially in audiobooks. When I need just something that I don't need to put much mental energy into, that I just sort of have on in the background, I've tended towards romance over the past couple of months. This one, it's not that it didn't work for me, it was just too long for what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something mindless. I think if you like romance, especially queer romance, this could work for you, but it just was taking a bit too long, and I got to about 3/4 of the way through and I was like, you know what, I'm just finding this fine. I'm not really itching to get back to it. I'm not itching to finish it, so I just didn't. So that one was a DNF. Next, I have some 1 stars. So I continued on with my reread of the Belinda Blink series, and that is the, thank you, Reg, and that is the erotic novels that are read by the podcast My Dad Wrote a Porno. So in that reread, because I got to the last volume and I just needed a refresher of the series, so much went down and so much was referenced to previous books in the series that I just needed a refresh. Each of these books gets 1 star. Like, the podcast itself is great. I really love it. I really love the way that they read it and commentate on it. But the books themselves are just terrible. It follows Belinda Blink in the world of the pots and pans industry as she kind of like sleeps her way to the top. But this month, or November, I finished volumes 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 in preparation for watching the finale episodes. Next, I have a 3-star, and that is a comic that I just found on Scribd randomly, and I heard that it had a lesbian protagonist, so I wanted to give it a go, and that is Vampires, Volume 1. Yeah, I just found it, like, everything was just okay. The story was okay. The art style was okay. The plot line and the characters were just okay. It just didn't really work for me. And at this point, I really can't remember much that happened. I remember that there was a girl and another girl arrives at a family member's funeral and sort of mind controls the rest of the family into like thinking that she belongs there. But yeah, it just didn't really work for me. But I'm glad that comics are starting to get more queer characters in them, so I'm happy it exists. Okay, now I have some 3.5 stars. First of all, I have You Make It Look Good. This one was, this is what I was talking about before, where if I needed something mindless, just on in the background, then I found these like short romance audiobooks on my audiobook apps. And so a bunch of them I gave 3.5 stars. They were enjoyable, but not memorable, really. This one follows a photographer and a model. I thought that these, well, this one in particular did tackle some really interesting topics, like people seeing modelling as not a real job, or people seeing it as, oh, if you do XYZ, even if it's for enjoyment purposes, then you're never going to be able to make a career out of it. You'll never go any further, even if that's not what the person wants. And I thought their dynamic was really fun. I just think they went from bad first interaction, hating each other, to liking each other way too fast. Although that, with the page count, that's probably going to happen. I just wish in a lot of these there had been some sort of time jump, some sort of like this is how they first interacted, then several months later they were put back together at a party or something like that. I just don't think that, you know, the next day they get together and they're like, actually I find you really attractive and let's get together and blah blah blah. So yeah, it was fine, and I'm always looking for more gay books to recommend, but yeah. The next one I read was The Companion. So this is a book following 3 trans characters. And the book follows them meeting or having passed with each other, and different people finding others attractive. And so this one follows a writer who really isn't having any success. A lot of people don't want to publish her stories. And she goes and stays with a friend of a friend. And she's kind of given the freedom to do what she wants and write her book. And in doing so, she starts to develop feelings for both the person who she's staying with and the neighbour, or the person living on the neighbouring farm. This one I thought was fine, but something I really enjoyed about it was the exploration of just like trans people living happy lives and getting to like be happy and have relationships and be open. And I just think that we need more of that in the world. So it was an enjoyable read for the time. But if you're specifically looking for trans fiction where you have characters being happy, then I would really recommend this. Now I've got one I can't remember what the hell it is. The Reality of Us. I'm gonna have to actually look it up. I can't even remember. Okay, I've remembered now. So the next book I read, or the next book I gave 3.5 stars, was The Reality of Us. So this one follows 2 people who are brought together by a work sort of initiative to really try and get people to bond. So these 2 people go on a hike. They're very different. They have a lot of misconceptions about each other. One thinks he's just like the ultimate flirt and doesn't really care about anything. The other thinks that he's really standoffish and doesn't like anyone, is really rude, and etc. This one I really enjoyed the exploration of like past traumas and how that can impact your relationship and how people move on from that. We follow, so the one character who appears to be quite standoffish suffers from severe anxiety, has severe PTSD, and that was a really interesting thing to follow the exploration of. And I think that it was, as far as I can tell, it was covered really respectfully. There was one thing I didn't really like, and this isn't going to be, I'm sure this won't bother like anyone else, but one of the characters like was saying, you know, what are you reading? And he was like, oh, the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And just from what I've heard of that book, it's just about this asshole saying like, I have all the answers and no one is as amazing as me and blah blah blah. And like, I was wondering whether or not that was added as a plot point to be like, he's reading it as a joke, or this is how he thinks. So like that was the only thing that made me go a bit okay about it, but other than that, it was a very enjoyable story. Also a gay romance. Next we have Queer Atmospheres. So this is a collection by Imogen Maxwell Tweed, and some of these stories I've read before, but as their own separate short story, and I think they were expanded upon to make those short stories just because they seemed a lot shorter as I was sort of flicking through the collection. I really enjoyed the ways that she was exploring these fantastical concepts. It was like there was a world where people develop a tattoo over time to show what their future relationship is going to be, not in terms of like how it's going to pan out, but say someone will have a matching tattoo or someone will get a name or etc. And I think that was a really, so a couple, I'm not explaining myself very well. The way that this short story collection was collated was that instead of having one short story in order to explore a theme, there were a couple of short stories either set in the same place or following different characters following the same general theme. Like, for example, there was a couple of short stories with the idea of someone developing a tattoo that would tell them who their sort of soulmate was, and I thought that it really did a good job of exploring queerness in that way and the ideas of gender and learning your gender over time. It wasn't the most groundbreaking thing, as I said, it only got like a 3.5 star, but it was a very enjoyable read. Next I have another one in the same category. It was a queer romance, so it is Love Zipper. I can't remember who this is by either, but I'm sure it'll be up on the screen now. So yeah, Love Zipper was just fine. It was it's about a woman who has a crush on her boss and has what she perceives to be a rival to her affections, someone that he's really close to, and she really hates this woman and then finds out that she is the owner of this dog called Zipper that she is obsessed with on Instagram, and they kind of bond over the dog, and it just goes on from there. It was fun, it was cute, I'm never gonna think about it again, and yeah. And lastly, we have Apricot Jam. I really don't know why it was called that. Like, it was set at a cafe, but there was never any mention of jam unless I like really missed it. So it follows the person who runs and owns the cafe and one of her employees who's just a really difficult employee to work with. I enjoyed the way that it explored workplace dynamics and also the development of workplace relationships, the power dynamics that can ensue. Also, I found it quite fun following these two characters. It was very clear that there were feelings and chemistry between the two of them, but it was very clear that due to their, I would say, immaturity, I think they both start off the book quite immature or thinking they are more mature than they are. They don't quite know how to express those feelings around each other and can then be perceived as more of a difficult person. But yet again, it wasn't the most groundbreaking thing. I didn't expect it to be because of its shortness, but it was an enjoyable read. Okay, now we're moving on to 4 stars, some of which I own. So I was searching my shelves and they were in my pile of things that I read this month, which of course they should be there. And I've also recently rearranged my shelves. I haven't quite got it to a point where I am completely happy with it, but it does mean that I'm now not as familiar with where things are. So I continued with my read of the Heartstopper graphic novel series over this month. So I ended up reading volumes 4. Oh, this is first. Volumes 3, volumes 4, and the Heartstopper yearbook. Making a pile. There we go. So this, hold on up. So this comic series follows Nick and Charlie, who are 2 characters from one of Alice Oseman's previous books. She was originally releasing these as a sort of web series, and then they got popular enough to be picked up by a publisher, and so she released them in these volumes. It has obviously become a Netflix series fairly recently, and just people really love the series. I think it's great. I didn't love volume 1 as much as everyone else seems to, but that was mainly because the art style is so sort of big and there's not much plot that goes on per page. I didn't feel satisfied by the end of the first volume, so I really appreciated just waiting until I had more volumes in the series and then just flying through them. I think this is a really healthy look at just teenage relationships. I think that the pacing's really good. We start off where the characters very much feel like it's a one-sided crush, and there's a lot of stereotypes about or there's a lot of perceived stereotypes about, oh, this person can't be gay because they're like this or because they've had relationships with women, and about people, like the characters, really finding themselves and really growing out of their shell and becoming a lot closer over the series. And I also found that this one especially started dealing very heavily with eating disorders. So trigger warning if that's something that would bother you, but I thought that the exploration was really good and healthy in my opinion, so these were great. Also, I found the yearbook just a lovely addition to the series. A lot of it's full colour illustrations of the characters with a bit more information, a few short stories, and a bit of information also about how the comic series has changed over time in terms of the character design, etc. So I found this a really good read. The next book I don't have, and that is Sex from Scratch. This was such an interesting non-fiction book, just about how we've now decided as human beings that this is what a relationship means, and this is what a relationship in a family looks like, and how, one, that's not been the case for all of human history. It's also not been the case depending on where you are in the world and your culture, and also that families can look very different. It doesn't have to be one man, one woman, 2.5 kids and a dog, you know. So I found this a really interesting look. I thought that, so it was split up into several essay type chapters that looked into a particular topic, threaded through with experiences from the author themselves, and I just thought it was a really interesting novel, and I highly recommend for anyone interested in like sex and gender studies. The next 4-star I have is The Turn of the Screw. I should know who this is by, but I can't remember. So essentially this was released as a audiobook by a YouTuber I really like the voice of over the Halloween period, so I decided to give it a go. Personally, I didn't find this scary. This is sort of touted as one of the, you know, really big horror novels of its day, etc. I just found the writing so flowery to the point where it was no longer really all that scary. It follows a woman who is hired as a nanny to these 2 children, and creepy things start happening. She thinks there's something wrong with the kids. She keeps on seeing ghosts. She thinks they're being haunted, and it's very ambiguous horror. You don't really know what's going on, especially you're not even in her head. You are being told the story from, so someone else is telling her story to a group of people, and I think that layer of being removed means that you really question about what is real and what isn't. I was listening to the version done by A Bit Late, or the YouTube channel A Bit Late. I'll link them down below because I think they're great. But she was saying about how people have read into this as a queer story as well. So the narrator says that she did have a friend or a love in this story, and the only other person that could be related to would be a woman in the story. I can't remember if she's a cook or a maid or some sort of servant in the household, and their friendship I thought was really interesting. Even without that, I read them as a queer couple, so I really enjoyed it. So next we have The Sea Witch by Katie Roberts. So this I didn't realise was part of a series, and it's part of a series that I already knew about and kind of had no interest in. So I don't know, it's weird that I ended up reading this anyway. So, Katie Robert is known for writing incredibly sex-heavy novels, especially in the sort of BDSM realm, and a lot of people recommend her books if things like 50 Shades of Grey were really offensive to you and you wanted more healthy representation of BDSM. I will say the BDSM representation I thought was very good and healthy. They were like, the characters were clearly very knowledgeable. Everything was, in terms of the BDSM elements, everything was very consensual. But the one thing, so anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Each of the books in these in this series is a retelling of some sort of mythological or especially Disney movies, and very much not for children. So I think the first one was like from Aladdin. The second one, like, there's a Beauty and the Beast one, there's a Hades and Persephone one, and this one is about the Little Mermaid and the Sea Witch. So there were some fun references in there, and it follows Zuriel, who is Ariel, as she desperately needs money in order to accomplish something, and she ends up striking this bargain with the Sea Witch in order to get the money. Now, the thing that gave me a little bit of the ick, and I do think it's kind of explored, but I don't know, it's just that they made such an effort to make sure that every character was consenting to everything that was happening. However, Zuriel enters this situation, I don't want to spoil anything, but she enters this situation under false pretenses. Once she finds out the truth, then she can still leave that situation at any point. But the fact that it was sold to her under false pretenses gives me a little bit of the ick. So it was an enjoyable enough read, but I don't know, I'm not rushing to pick up another Katie, was it Katie Robert? Anyway, I'm not rushing to pick up another one of her books. Next, we have a couple of graphic novels. So the first one being Patience and Esther. This one I just basically found on Scribd, and it is a queer graphic novel following two characters in the Victorian times, possibly Edwardian. Anyway, in the past, where I can't even remember which character was which in terms of the names, but we have a woman joining a household as a servant or a maid, and she gets paired up with another woman to sort of show her the ropes and to share a room, and they end up becoming very close and starting a relationship. I thought that the art style was beautiful. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the sort of darker and heavier themes that were discussed. It was discussing queer relationships and women's positions at this time, about race and racism. There was another character dealing with an eating disorder. There was just so many topics brought up. I also loved the fat rep. One of the main characters is fat, and she has stretch marks, and just the love that were between these two characters, not despite her being fat, but it just was never a turn off for them, and it was just a really wonderful relationship in that way. Even though the art style is very cutesy, it's definitely a graphic novel for adults. There was on page sex in this one. I am actually going to buy a copy of it, so I'll show you some more of the art style when I actually purchase a copy, but I really enjoyed it regardless. The next one I have is Squad. Now, this is a queer 80s werewolf story, and I seriously thought I kind of knew where this was going. I kind of thought this was going to end up very Mean Girls-esque. I thought we were going to have this new girl in school. She starts making a few friends and then gets sort of adopted by the popular girls, and then she turns on the people who she originally found, and she sort of loses a part of herself in order to either gain popularity or take down the popular girls. And I was really pleasantly surprised that that wasn't the case. And I really enjoyed the way this story progressed compared to a lot of the more classic chick flicks that I've been forced to watch by my friends. So essentially we follow the setups are very similar. We follow a girl new to school. She starts making some friends but gets sort of adopted into this group of more popular girls. And then she discovers that there's something more dark and sinister about these more popular girls. But I don't want to spoil the way the book goes, but I loved the subversion of those typical tropes. So this was a very enjoyable read as well. Next, do I have a copy of this book? No, I don't think I do. So next I read The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, I think it is. It's either Paul Tremblay or Josh Malerman. I can't quite remember. I think it's Paul Tremblay. Obviously, you'll be seeing the correct author on the screen. So this book follows... I mean, I don't want to say too much about it because it's the sort of book that I think does best if you go in not knowing much. But it's a take on the sort of classic... There's a couple and a child who decide to go on holiday. They're in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods. They're on a lake, and then some people arrive and horror things start occurring. So it's very weird. You really don't know what's going on for the most part, and then you start to piece together what's happening. I enjoyed the discussions of queerness as well. The couple are a gay couple, and their daughter was just delightful. And it was really interesting the way that the author had some chapters from the daughter's perspective. I thought that was really interesting as well. And I thought this was good, but I'd be wary to recommend it broadly. Next, I have another comic, but it's not one that has a specific plot. It's called Just Peachy, and it's essentially a set of comics about the author's how she lives with depression, and I thought it was a really interesting read and very enjoyable. So I finally read The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. Now this one I now know has a sequel. I don't think I'll be reading it, but I did very much enjoy this. It's very much weird, whimsical fairy tale vibes, leaning into the horror side. It's very clear that this author loves the darker, older versions of fairy tales. So in here we follow a girl who, she doesn't have a very stable life. Her and her mother move a lot, and she's finally in a position where she thinks that they can finally sort of more settle down. It's clear that she's also keeping quite a bit from the reader, and her grandmother is someone who was a very, very famous author, but not much is known about her. No one's really seen her for years. People really think that she's dead online, and her grandmother was famous for writing this book of fairy tales all set in the Hazelwood. Her mother is then kidnapped and she has to find her mother, and the only clues really are what's going on with her grandmother and with these fairy tales. And I thought this was a really fun read. It was really, really compelling, and I really liked the darker fairy tale vibes of this. Also, there are side queer characters in this. None of the main characters, I believe, were queer in any way, but a couple of side ones were, and I enjoyed that aspect. Next, we have Deadpool. Which one is this? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So this one I thought was very interesting because the first chapter is a Deadpool comic or chapter that was written and produced but never released at the time because people thought it was too scandalous, and it then got released later, and there is then a time jump from that chapter to the next, but I really loved how all of the subsequent stories then related back to the events of that first chapter. Deadpool is my favourite Marvel character. I still need to watch the movies, which is ridiculous. I haven't gotten around to them. But it was just really good, and I found that I really like the Deadpool comics that that are quite fun, but also tackle more serious topics. So I really enjoyed this. Something else I really enjoyed about it, I just forgot to mention, is the fact that I like seeing how Deadpool interacts with a lot of the other members of the Marvel team, and how even in more serious situations, sometimes he can be very quickly written off by other characters, and I liked seeing the progression of their relationship over time.